I'm Shirmila Ramasamy, a senior counsel at the World Bank. I'm a capital markets lawyer, and I work on the World Bank's innovative financing products, including outcome-based bonds such as the Wildlife Conservation Bond, or, as it's more commonly known, the Rhino bond. Together with my colleague Jorge Alva, we were supported by legal teams from Credit Suisse, Linklaters, and the Zoological Society of London, some of whom will help introduce the Rhino bonds for this Grunin Prize finalist submission that follows.
Greetings, everyone. I am Jorge Luis Alva-Luperdi, and I serve as Senior Counsel in the Legal Department of the World Bank. Today, I have the privilege of introducing you to the World Bank Wildlife Conservation Bond Project, the pioneer conservation program that is setting a new standard for private capital investment in the field of conservation. The bond project is a revolutionary initiative unlike anything that has been attempted before. By tapping into private capital markets, the bank raised $150 million through the issuance of a 5-year Rhino bond. These funds will go towards promoting wildlife conservation and biodiversity in South Africa, further reinforcing our commitment to sustainable development. What sets this project apart is its unique investment structure. Unlike other bonds, our investors have chosen to forego coupon payments and instead have agreed to direct the funds towards critical conservation activities that will boost the growth rate of the rhino population in 2 South African national parks. What's even more remarkable is that we offer the option for investors to receive a success payment from the Global Environment Facility, GEF, at bond maturity, depending on the growth rate of the rhino population during the bond's lifetime. This innovative approach aligns the interests of the private capital, the GEF, the South African National Parks, and the World Bank. We are proud to be playing 2 critical roles as bond issuer and project supervisory entity. We have developed ad hoc World Bank legal documentation to ensure the success of the project. As a supervisory entity, we enter into agreements with the parks to guarantee that bond coupon payments will be used to serve the intended purposes. As bond issuer, we have agreed with the parks to extend coupon payments to make success payments to bond investors in accordance with the growth rate of rhino black populations. The bond project offers a range of exciting benefits. It allows bond investors to assume project risks, to deploy scarce donor capital more optimally, while promoting biodiversity in a cost-effective manner that complements World Bank policies and procedures. Overall, the bank project represents a groundbreaking initiative that showcases the power of private capital to drive positive change and promote sustainable outcome in the field of conservation.
In terms of the problem that the Wildlife Conservation Bond was designed to solve, it was mainly to bridge the financing gap of up to $800 billion that currently stands in terms of conservation and biodiversity and ecosystems. Financial instruments that can crowd in additional private capital for conservation, therefore, are urgently needed. Now, rhinos play a crucial role in Africa's wild ecosystems, and they're critical to other species and to the national economy of South Africa through tourism and jobs. However, black rhinos in particular are critically endangered due to poaching and loss of habitat. The black rhino population numbers at the 2 South African parks supported by the rhino bonds represent a significant portion of South Africa's, and in fact the global, black rhino population. The parks have a strong track record of rhino growth in recent years. However, further conservation investments are required to secure and grow this important black rhino population. So the objectives of the Wildlife Conservation Bond Project are to secure and grow the black rhino population, mainly, but to also support over 2,000 jobs for the local community and improve the management of a 153,000 hectare area from the project's conservation activities. More importantly, the transaction tests a new model for conservation financing, where investors accept project outcome risk in return for a potential payout if the project is successful. The structure creates an opportunity for private investment in conservation supported by sound quantifiable metrics and models.
My name is Anthony Stringer, Director and Head of Legal Coverage for Debt Capital Market Products in EMEA at Credit Suisse International. The project looked to create a new means of financing to help with conservation efforts. with a financial instrument dedicated to protecting the species. The instrument has been described as an outcome payments model and provides a potential return on investment that comprises both a financial return and a measurable conservation objective. With this solution, conservation finance can be expanded beyond traditional conservation donors such as governments and NGOs to now include the private sector. As lawyers on a project such as this, our roles are to help ensure that the structures envisioned in order to measure the population growth rate and any associated conservation success payments were robust, achievable, and could be clearly understood by investors. Our role also included ensuring that the prospectus supplement and final terms contained all material information for investors to make an informed investment decision as to whether to invest in the project. As well as identifying the structure of the bond and the proposed counting and payment methodologies, a key component of a securities lawyer's role in this kind of project is to look at the risk factors and work with the issuer to ensure these are robust and as fulsome as possible. Given the unique nature of the project and the inherent risks associated with conservation projects for endangered species such as the black rhino, this required a lot of diligence and thoughtful consideration from the issuer and the legal teams involved in the project.
I'm Sirae Chen, a managing associate of the debt capital markets team at Linklaters. We acted for Credit Suisse and Citibank as joint book runners on the issuance by the World Bank of the first wildlife conservation bond, also known as the Rhino bond. We were pleased to support Credit Suisse and Citi on this milestone transaction, which provides an innovative financing model for investors. It was a real privilege to have worked on this groundbreaking Rhino bond, which makes use of existing bond technology in a creative way to address conservation and biodiversity issues.
The design phase of the Rhino bonds was rather protracted, and the final structure is really the result of an iterative process involving multiple stakeholders. Now, lawyers were involved from the very inception of this design phase and played a critical role alongside business principals. The nature of this unique structure was such that lawyers brought to the table multiple areas of legal expertise, ranging from specialist operational and policy expertise relevant to the World Bank's operations, given the underpinning Global Environment Facility grant, to securities law and capital markets expertise relevant to the bond itself. Ultimately, though, structured finance expertise in designing the overarching Rhino bond transaction structure was critical. Now, there are three things of note, really, in terms of the fundamental role of lawyers in the Rhino bond project. The first is really that this was the first time a grant from the Global Environment Facility to 2 South African parks was linked to payments due to investors on an IBRD-issued bond. In other words, conservation success payments payable by IBRD as issuer to its investors. Likewise, it was also the first time that IBRD as issuer of a sustainable development bond would make payments to the beneficiaries of a Global Environment Facility grant. In other words, conservation investment payments payable by IBRD as issuer to the parks. This required, amongst other things, creating new legal relationships between IBRD's issuer of the bonds and the parks, as well as aligning IBRD's operational policies and procedures underpinning the Global Environment Facility grant with IBRD's capital markets bond issuance platform, which have until now never been so closely linked. The second fundamental role of lawyers in the Rhino transaction was really to help develop rhino population growth rate metrics through a matrix of relationships between the park's calculation agent, the verification agent, and the issuer. Now, in order for conservation success payments to be made to investors on maturity, lawyers needed to build a string of legal obligations between stakeholders to ensure rhino population growth rate calculation and verification would work in lockstep with critical milestones on the bond itself to assess conservation outcomes. There was no real precedent for the proposed structure, so lawyers had to evaluate the need for accuracy, speed, and independence of data and verification steps in formulating these stakeholder relationships. All very novel. Now, the final interesting piece of legal input into the structure related to management of sensitive data surrounding rhino population growth rates itself. Of course, critical to the transaction design is robust and verifiable data on rhino population growth rates. At the same time, given the greatest threat to rhino conservation is hunting and poaching, confidentiality of data related to rhino population distribution is equally important. Lawyers were therefore responsible for balancing these different objectives while ensuring equitable access to rhino population data for existing as well as prospective investors. This included structuring novel arrangements for data disclosure via confidential virtual data rooms with restricted access. Now, many of these three aspects have been used to replicate the structure that we are discussing today on rhino bonds for other outcome-based bonds. And it is anticipated that further elements from this rhino bond will be useful in replicating other outcome-based bond structures in the near future.